good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you are and however you are listening to this episode of Leadership Bites, it is an absolute privilege to have you listening to us today. On this episode, I have Jamil Qureshi. Now, Jamil is somebody who I've been following for some time with a little bit of starry-eyed admiration, if I'm being honest. Jamil's just one of those characters that is constantly delivering keynote speeches and is talking to people on a global scale. So, of course, that took my attention. There are a lot of people in the world today professing to be the leading practitioner of their area. There's lots of people in the world who are trying to make out that they are the number one speaker or they are fantastically busy. The thing about Jamil is he actually is fantastically busy. He is constantly speaking in the UK, globally, and has a phenomenal reputation. I believe he is one of, if not the most booked speaker for some of the UK's leading bureaus, literally year on year. So Jamil's background is one of psychology. He's been somebody who was actually the first ever official psychologist to work with the European Ryder Cup team, captained by Ian Woosnam. He has worked with some 22 golfers in the top 50. He's been ranked amongst the most influential figures in British sport in 2009, etc. So this is an individual who really has got the eyes and ears of those who want to see output and they want to see performance. He speaks to Coca-Cola, to Hewlett-Packard, to lots of organisations who seek his insights and input. So I was, as you may imagine, I was really looking forward to having the conversation. Now, the thing with Jamil is that sometimes when you speak to somebody, you get a sense that they're very capable. They know their stuff. They are highly read, highly knowledgeable, and it is absolutely worth listening to them purely because of the knowledge base that they bring. And that's definitely true with Jamil. There's an and with Jamil as well, which really struck me. He's incredibly engaging. There's a natural, and I don't almost know what the word is, but maybe that's just it. There's a naturalness about him. He isn't presenting himself to the world as, inverted commas, a professional. He's not got a caricature of overly demonstrating his skill and his knowledge. He just is present in the conversation. We were able to have a really natural conversation. Sometimes when I am talking to guests on the show, it feels a little bit like I'm running an interview because they don't necessarily volunteer information unless they get a direct question. With Jamil, it was, first of all, we were laughing before we even started the show. And that was with me, with him, somebody who we'd never met before. But he is one of those people that you instinctively have that connection with. He's probably one of those people that if you said I didn't like Jamil, then it's probably more about you than it is about him, because he comes at it from a position of wanting to engage and wanting to be curious and not wanting to share because he is the font of knowledge, but because he wants to have a conversation with you. And we may agree or disagree. He may change his mind. He may not. He might reinforce his position. He might reinforce yours. But he wants the conversation. So I loved it. I was really taken with him. I was really impressed by him. One of the few times, there's been a few recently, and Jamil was one of those people that I just thought, wow, if I could have access to more conversations with you, I'd be better for it. But on that note, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. So, Jamil, fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites.
Thank you for inviting me, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Well, this is actually my absolute pleasure because I've been quasi-stalking you from a distance on LinkedIn, seeing the great things that you do. So from that point of view, I'm probably more excited to have you on than you are to be on, but it's great to have you here.
I'm sure that's not true. It's a meeting of great minds. That's what we'll tell everyone.
Okay, I'm buying into that. So I've done a little intro just at the start of the episode just to say who you are, but just for people that haven't come across you, it's great, I think, just to hear the who you are and what are you known for. And I think, it'd be great just to hear that from you.
Well, I'm a performance coach and psychologist. I'm very lucky. I get a chance to work with some very good sports teams, some very good business teams. When the world is normal, I would travel around the world and hopefully work with teams to change their thinking, to change their doing. That's what I would say. I think the only way in which you change your behaviours is to change your thoughts. And so I guess what I would do more than anything else is help people change their mind. So get people to create a new perspective to allow them to create new possibilities and new opportunities. So as a performance consultant and performance coach, it's all about trying to find out what people do and then help them to do it better. And the way in which I help them to do it better was to help them to think in a new or different way to optimize their talent. That's really where I spent my time and where I spend my time now. I don't do it on stage and I don't do it in rooms at this year. I do it in front of a computer.
The new paradigm that we all live in.
I've got to admit, the variety of my work, Guy, has been substantially better. I've been doing sort of like different types of work this year, but the variety of my location has been the issue.
So it is worth noting, and I think you're almost somehow playing it down a little bit, that one of the reasons that I reached out to you is because of the prolific nature, I think, of your output in terms of just being a speaker. And it would be maybe just valuable just to hear, pre-COVID, just to give a sense of the line of sight you had, because I think we are often the exposure that we get. And, how much work were you doing and where were you doing it?
Yeah, so, I guess the last 8 years or so, and you're right, actually, how I describe myself is probably sort of not necessarily true. And the reason why was that I ended up sort of speaking about my work more than doing it. So, so literally over the last 8 years or so, you know how it is. You look at your diary one day and you sort of turn around and think, oh, I'm a guest speaker. That's what I seem to be sort of filling my time with. So I was speaking 3 or 4 days a week, anywhere in the world. I was on average abroad twice a week. And I speak for anyone who'd have me. So it was a sales kickoff, it was a all-staff conference, customer day, and my natural habitat actually is actually on stage. So I quite like being on stage with a few hundred people in front of me. I use a flip chart. I don't use PowerPoint.
I noticed that.
I tend to scribble on a flip chart. It's just how my brain works. That's all. And so I've spent the last 8 years or so doing my work and actually working in teams 1 day a week. The other sort of 3 or 4 days a week, I was actually sort of talking about my work, sharing some insights, some practical takeaways at something which I guess sort of speeches which I call content rich. I try to get across a lot really in a short amount of time to hopefully enable people to shift their perspectives. So even in half an hour or an hour of talking and speaking on stage, I'm just hoping that people move into a new space in regard to their mindset to allow them to go back into their work and back into their world and perhaps approach some of those tasks differently.
And how did you get, when I say to be you, that's always but we get to a point in life, but there was a route to getting there. And I often find that the journey to who we are today is almost as interesting as what it is that we're talking about, because it feeds the validity of, I can talk about that because of, that time I had, in the Congo with the pygmies or whatever it was. Yeah. But it'd be, how did you get to be you without that being too vague a question?
No, that's good. That's a good question. It's a tricky one to answer, to be honest, because it's definitely a road less travelled. So, I sort of turned around one day and realised I was here, and there was no great plan. I wish I could tell you about the superb business planning that I had and the route that I followed. And all the sort of good fortune along the way, but it's been a series of ups and downs, really. I'll give you a potted history, mate. That what happened was that my interest has always been psychology. I used to play cricket and enjoyed playing cricket, and that was sort of taking off as a career for me. But I was technically good as a cricketer, but my mindset was bad. So I was particularly bad in regard to my attitude. So I've always had a poor attitude. And then what happened was that someone said that you should see a psychologist. So I saw a psychologist and took me further away from cricket. And actually into the space of psychology. I became really interested in it. So I then did my time spent sort of studying was business and marketing. I did that and came out in a variety of roles in business development and commercial roles in a variety of places. And wasn't happy doing it. I never sort of really fitted into that corporate world. So I gave it all up to become a magician, much to my parents' dismay.
Of course you did.
And so I went to the Congo with a pack of cards. No, that bit's not true.
That'd be so great if it was, though.
Wouldn't it? So what happened was that I decided to, but the magic that I was really interested in was psychological magic. Like magic like sort of Darren Brown and Keith Barry. So because I was interested in psychology. So, I went to a pub in Newark and did a sort of series of mind reading and psychology talks to 50 drunk people who don't want to see it. And I had really good fortune from there. I met a few people who had some contacts in television. I met a few people from that who had some contacts in sport. And one day a golfer turned around and asked me, whether I could help him, and I said yes. And I went off and read another book on psychology and came back with some more techniques. And he nearly won the Open. So he did very well. And professional sport is a really small world. So because he did well, I personally got press on. I got mentioned in the press, the national press, the Telegraph and Mail and things, because he was very generous with the credit. And so other golfers came and joined me. And within a year, I was working with some of the best golfers on the planet. The golfers know all the sort of Premiership footballers and international cricketers. I started working with them. And then business people said to me that, look, you are working with, some of the best golfers around. Can you come and have a chat to my sales team about what they do in regard to performance? And so I started doing some talks with corporate audiences. And how it is with your career. Once you start doing some talks, if you do them well, you'll be asked to do more. And that's exactly what happened to me. Was that people took me away from sport and into that area of business again. So I came full circle because people wanted to find out, what do elite sports people do? And because I'm more comfortable talking to business audiences than I am actually to sports people anyway, I made a very natural and very easy transition to be spending 95% of my time now helping business audiences achieve performance through talking about culture, transformation, leadership, whatever it might be, which is sort of relevant to the current day.
So I remember getting your book, The Mind Coach, with a gorgeous picture of you on the front, looking incredibly wise. And so that was be the person you really want to be.
It's not a great book. I wish you didn't plug that. It's not a good book at all. No,
let's delete that from our consciousness.
Yeah. So, I wrote that in 2008. It's amazing, actually, because one of the things which I genuinely believe is that doing psychology or performance coaching is a bit like learning to swim by reading a book. It just doesn't happen. So 2008, I don't think I was particularly advanced in regard to psychology. And here we are, a number of years later, and I think the more you do of it, the better you get. I think it's the same with anything. I think that's the same with speaking on stage. Just working with individuals.
I had Dave Ulrich, who's the well-known HR guru, on the podcast, and he said, people talk to me about the Ulrich model. He said, but that was one of the first things I do. I did. I've moved on. And I don't want to be known for the first thing that I ever said.
Yeah, and that's how I feel about the Mind Coach, to be honest. but because what I said in it wasn't very good. But you know what? Business is a game of continual adjustment, isn't it? We need to learn to dance on a shifting carpet, not see the rug being pulled.
Well, do you know what? Actually, having something out that you've moved out on and you've moved up on is a way of actually role modeling what development is. It was fine at the time, but I've moved on as a culture should, and so it's indicative of your craft, probably.
Well, I always say that you can't trust the future to anyone who champions the past. The future demands us to be different, doesn't it? And part of that difference, be it in a leadership team or be it a company or be it an individual, is to reimagine, repurpose, reinvent, to be future relevant and future literate. And you look at the time that we are in now, and I can guarantee you that all the companies I'm working with at the moment are the ones who are struggling the most, are the ones who are trying to get back to normal. The ones who are flourishing are the ones who are moving forwards into this space of reimagining and repurposing, starting to see the beauty in the chaos. Because once we start to realize that, there is always opportunity, and it's the perspective that we have which allows us to, gain sight of that, then I think that we can become more agile and open-minded, in the way in which we construct our organizations and construct our thinking, to then allow us to deploy resource to opportunity in the most relevant way.
Yeah, the new normal isn't the past in some respects.
No, I mean, and I think that, there's no, it's funny that people say something new normal. There's nothing normal about it. It's totally abnormal. And, I think it's the new now. So and this time next year, there'll be another new now, which will be different to this. I'm convinced of it.
I saw one of my favorite memes that went around was, that job that they told you for 20 years that you couldn't do from home? It turns out you can.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of what kept us in the office, or what kept us in that, because, we had a tunnel on what right looked like.
Yes, that's right. And I think the assumptions that our businesses have been built upon, have been roundly challenged. So I always say it's better to be disrupted from the inside than it is to be disrupted from the outside. And so, these are the thoughts that we should have been having, the challenges that we should have been, the conflict that we should have been having within our businesses anyway. And so we're ready for change. And so, I agree with you. I think that it is possible to do many things in a different way now. The only thing I'll say, though, Guy, is that what's really interesting is that I think that people are a little bit bored of these sort of virtual platforms. I'm seeing it all the time: Teams, Zoom, WebEx. When these things first came out, people said it's the end of conferences. No one's going to fly anywhere. No one's going to do anything when these things first arrived. But that wasn't the case. We still continued to meet, even though we had Zoom and Teams and WebEx. And so I do think that, we'll, as a social species, we will want that contact again. We will want serendipity. We'll want the chance encounters. And I don't know what the lost opportunity cost is for organizations at the moment, but it's certainly a two-dimensional way of working, and I think that we need a three-dimensional interaction to allow us to be successful.
Yeah, it's like digital books will kill the paperback or something, whatever that is, and I think there is the chance conversation. We're talking about nothing, but actually we just generate an idea in conversation on the way to the conference. All these little things, or I just feel a little bit more comfortable with you, and I'm just more likely to want to do something with you. All these little things don't necessarily come out of, it's not that this can't enable, but it is a different thing. Definitely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And I always say that, it's great being a guest speaker at a conference, and I hope that it's useful to people. But that time spent over the coffee machine complaining about the vol-au-vents, or that time waiting in the foyer as you're going to get your breakfast, is invaluable. And so many teams come together for a day or 2 days in Barcelona or Madrid or Dubai, wherever in the world. And everyone talks about the value of the connectivity just as much as they do the agenda. And I do think, I don't know about you, mate, but the more that we've been asked to stay apart, the more I've realised how much we need to be together. And I think that no one knows the answers. So therefore, what we need to do is to be more connected. We need to play into people more. So the more inclusive, collaborative, and connected, the more knowledge sharing that goes on, the more successful we can be, because we'll make more sense of the world. And so, paradoxically, there's a greater call, I believe, and certainly in the teams that I'm working with, for greater connectivity. We need to connect more than we ever have done, because safety in numbers. Let's make sure that we're sharing knowledge and understanding the world by hearing the diverse opinions and experiences of other people.
Yeah, I've got a little phrase there, which is, the tribe needs the campfire. And, I firmly believe in that, which is that capacity to come together and share. And to just be in each other's presence at a human level. There's just that sense of, I am not alone, which when we're talking about resilience and well-being, I think is that just that sense of not being alone, let alone sharing information and all the value that comes out of it. I think there's a base need for contact.
Totally agree. I thought you were going into another Congo story then at your campfire.
Well, I've got a bias, haven't I? We can see it coming out.
But you're determined to get us to Africa in this podcast, aren't you? Determined.
We're getting there.
But I agree, and I think it's a really good point. That I think from a performance perspective, let's drive change and transformation by being connected. But at a more human level, that you're absolutely right. That resilience comes from being part of something. Bravery and confidence is easier as part of a team. All of these things that are made possible by the idea of collaboration, connectivity, and cooperation. It's how we've built humankind, society and civilization today. So you're absolutely right. The benefits of connectivity are substantial.
Have you noticed has there been a shift? When COVID started, I was almost let's not make it about COVID because that'll get old pretty quick. But it's been going on long enough. Have people wanted to hear different things from you in this space, or is it, no, it's the same essence, but it's now just aimed into a different context?
It's a very good question, isn't it? I think I'll answer that in two ways. That I'm still doing the same thing with a different slant. So, I'm talking about productivity, I'm talking about motivation, morale, connectivity, team dynamic. So leadership in a new context, people strategies in a new context. So, all of those things are things which I've talked about previously. Anything to do with getting the most out of ourselves by using our mind. That's what I cover. I've just been doing it with a sort of different perspective because the world's changed. But the only thing that I've been talking about, which is different to what I usually talk about, is some of the macro environmental changes. So people are asking me about, you work with a lot of companies in a variety of sectors. So how do you see this playing out? Talking about more about the economy, about governance, and about the future of work. So they're conversations that I didn't really have before. People are more interested in their team and themselves. But I get more and more questions based upon the experience that I'm having with the variety of companies that I'm working with, and how they see things playing out sort of economically, or in regard to sort of, the future of business.
So I imagine that contextually for a business, things have changed. But when it comes to the people that are in those businesses, do you think that's still, in essence, the same message?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that we've all had sort of 8 or 9 months to sit at home alone with our soul, thinking about why we go to work, where we work, who we work with, what do we do, and who do we do it for. And then whilst we've done that, we've seen the world change dramatically. So the assumptions that our world has been built upon have been roundly challenged. What we thought was valuable is no longer valuable. What we didn't value, we're finding out is incredibly valuable. So I think perspectives are shifting all the time. So if you look at the way in which we sort of built our economies, you look at a Marshall Plan after the war, based upon competition, economies of scale, and you can see how we've almost ended up here. And the problem that we've got is that we had a sort of rickety old house which burnt down. Why should we go back and build a rickety old house? It's a time to construct something which is more sustainably successful. So I think that many of us are thinking about, how do we want to express our talent in a world which has now changed? So I was actually with a bank the other day, and the bank was talking about, I'm having conversations with bankers I've never heard before. So I had someone say to me a question like about getting the economy moving. And someone else interjected and say, well, look, we need to almost decide what the economy is for. And it's a really good question, because these are questions that we don't necessarily hear because we're trying to satisfy shareholder value. I think there's a new level of bravery in the way in which people might organise their careers and home life. There's a new level of bravery in which people might want to construct new teams and new businesses, which play into sectors in a different way to construct a world which is different to the one that we lived in before.
So I think this is where it gets into, what I call sort of big pants territory, which is that, it's like when I see people sort of talk about they run courses on leadership with love. I'm like, yeah, I get you. At a kind of, at a level of, wouldn't it be good if we could all share? I'm kind of with that. So that referencing, that redefining of the world, and why would we rebuild what we just had that didn't work? But then we've also got players in the global market who are playing a different game.
Yes. And that's exactly the problem. You're absolutely right. So you've 1% of the world's and 1% of the world's population own 50% of the wealth. So the status quo is.
But we've also got countries, let's Absolutely. Just, like China, for example, that are, they're politically based. They front as a commercial entity, but they have an agenda that I would say probably is they are generational in their strategy, and we're cyclical in ours. And it's almost like we're playing drafts and they're playing chess.
Yeah. And I think, but I'd like to think that we're going to sort of think a bit more systemically, and globally come together more. What we've seen, without getting too political on the podcast, that what we've seen authoritarianism not play out very well. You see what's happening in places like Hungary, America, and even in this country. Populism doesn't deal with this particularly well. So we need a more collaborative approach to solving the world's problems. And I think that for us to see things as them and us, China will do well out of this. America, is failing. It's a global problem needing a global solution. Such as along the likes of climate change, which will be a greater problem than COVID-19. For humanity. So, I would like to think, if you ask me optimistically, I'd like to think that there's going to be some better realization that we went through a intellectual crisis in 2008, and this is an existential crisis. This is different. And so maybe people's hearts and minds may allow us to play into each other and become more connected, in a way which is different to what we did before. So you ask me optimistically, I'd like to think that let's not look at different geographies or countries doing badly or well out of this. How do we, as a species, come together to solve some of the world's biggest problems, which affects us all? If you ask me on a pessimistic day, I would probably say that, the problem that we've got is that exactly as you've described it, that people are involving themselves in nationalism. And so, therefore, believing that the way forward is to look after our own. But, I don't see that as a way that we can play out of this from an economic perspective or even from a healthcare and public policy perspective.
And I think that's where I find it very interesting with dealing and working with senior teams on a personal level, which is that angst between what they believe to be right as a human being and what they feel themselves being pushed to do in the context of either their job security or an earnout or whatever it may be. And it's very interesting just to see good people very often, I won't go so far as to say doing bad things, but there's a very fine line between being motivated, bullish, and a bully. Yeah. And sometimes, high motivation is in that kind of, depending on who's experiencing it, is that kind of bullish area of, let's go, go, go. But go, go, go on a continual basis with no time for self becomes a kind of a bullying environment, even though I'm not being technically punched in the face.
Yeah.
And I think I wonder where your message, or maybe that this is because I don't understand it well enough, but when we talk, and I talk to people about personal resilience and personal mindsets, it's that, yes, Guy, but have you met my boss? Or, yes, Guy, but that's fine, but do you understand what's happening within this company? Or, yeah. And so I think often there's a desire by the human to want to do things, but the collective cultural push doesn't necessarily marry up to what's being asked, which I then think makes people even more anxious because they see the hypocrisy.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and you've hit it on the head. That the 85% of people who have a job don't like it. It's a statistic that plays out time and time again. You have a look at 85% of people who have a job aren't satisfied with it. And I honestly believe the reason why they're not satisfied with it is because it probably compromises their thinking. So it's contradictory. We get involved in organisations and get involved in teams that don't necessarily fit with who we are. So I always say that being a good leader or being a good colleague is seeking, not seeking to impress, but seeking to express. To be ourselves in the context of the workplace. And I think very few places are like that. This is the problem. So many companies have, mission statements, but very few are on a mission. They don't galvanise at a common purpose amongst some people who are passionate about where that organisation is heading because it fits with their values. There are a few companies who are doing it and doing it well, but the majority don't. And I think that the reason why people are unhappy in their role is because it's contradictory to their values. What happens then is they become stressed and anxious, makes them more susceptible to the virus. So therefore, there needs to be a reset with this world. We need to reset the way in which we look at health, at well-being, and we look at public policies to do with creating healthier environments for all the societies and communities to allow us to be more productive and successful in a more well-rounded manner.
Boom. I do like that phrase, which I may stick on a T-shirt, which is, you may have a mission statement, but are you on a mission? That's
when I was being provocative, when I used to stand on stage in the good old days, and I have a few hundred people in front of me, depending on what I was talking about. I was talking about culture or something. Sometimes you'd like this one, your sense of humour. I would say to the audience, do you have values on a wall? Put your hand up. You've got values on a wall. So it's like 400 or 500 people from a particular company, whoever it might be, and obviously 400 people put their hands up. And I said, okay, well, look, can I just ask you a quick question? How many of you drive into work every morning thinking, I cannot wait to express my company values today? And they all look down, including the board in the front row, all look down like this, sort of sniggering. I said, well, look, I've been a bit mischievous because you probably don't do that.
However...
You probably don't do that because you're driving into work thinking, I cannot wait to increase shareholder value today. And they all look even more embarrassed then, including the board. And I think, we don't go to work to increase shareholder value. We don't feel excited and engaged when we write out our to-do list. We don't go to work to, express the values which, someone has pinned up in our, in our office. We go to work to create meaning. I think that organisations and leaders, go wrong when they focus upon what they can have rather than what they can be. And I think that, let's start to, construct economies and businesses and teams and roles with some real meaning and purpose. Let's realise our contribution. Let's understand what we enable to take place in the world as a result of, expressing ourselves. And I think that if we can get into a idea or notion that culture is our true differentiator, and our only sustainable competitive advantage is to learn faster and better than our competitors in the way in which we construct that culture. I think that companies could do very well in the chaos which we're in at the moment.
People often talk about executive education, but I've got this kind of thing which it's more like executive growth, which is from your point of view, right, the numbers, the financials, whatever, you're either at a level of competence to understand it or you're not. We've then got that, there's something about space, how people find the space for themselves, how they find the space for others, and maybe how they find maybe that bravery, and it probably is at a senior level, to say, not so much when is enough, but how hard do we need to push? Because that Gantt chart with we're chasing all of these rabbits at the same time.
Yes.
Does that have to be done? And I think that's the work I'm very interested in at that most senior level, because actually, you're setting the tone, right?
Yeah, particularly at the moment. So I always say that the issues that a company will face are pretty unimportant. The ability to form a team that can deal with those issues is essential. So we can't predict the future. And the only thing that we can predict is that there'll be a level of uncertainty, complexity, and unpredictability. So, let's have a look at our thinking and strategies and plans, which allow us to embrace the idea that first things first, second things never. Let's focus upon what's really important, where we have impact, where we create value, what's meaningful. And let's start to direct our energy in that particular direction. The reason why football teams, and so it doesn't work in Premiership football teams, and the reason why they can play brilliantly together for 90 minutes, these teams, do you think about it? You've got a team of 11 people, they don't speak the same language. So some people in a Premiership football team won't even speak English. And so they don't speak the same language, they don't have the same background, they don't have the same religion, they play in different positions, different experiences, different times in their career, and they play brilliantly together for 90 minutes. So why do they do that, and how do they do that? One of the reasons why is the simplicity of winning. Everyone understands what winning looks like. There's a real clarity, there's simplicity. This is what we all know how to win a game of football, and we all know how to commit to a particular way of being and doing, which enables us to win. In business, it's so much more complicated. I bet you see it all the time. That, there's metrics which suggest we're winning in this area. And someone will say, well, I know, but we're losing in that one. I tell me, yeah, I know, but that's because of this. Have a look at here. And it almost seems that we're dotting around, not really plate spinning, but trying to make sure that this is successful and that's successful, so we can say that we're winning in that moment.
One of the things I talk about is unified purpose. And, if we say that kicking the ball into the back of the net is in essence a unified purpose, maybe, but what I actually find is at senior teams is that in startups, it can be a lot easier, but as the organization gets bigger, people, and this is an interesting statement from me, but people almost don't mind too much if the company doesn't do that well, as long as they do. Yeah. So if I do well and the company does well enough to keep going, I will be kept on because I did quite well. And that's I don't mean that of everybody, but I see a lot of that where they do know what the end game is of sorts. They understand what it is, but actually there's a human need for self-protection that actually gets in the way of the ideal. Yeah.
So that's very true. And again, you're absolutely right that the reason for it is protectionism. So maintaining a position, committing to neutrality. If I do my bit, I'm all right. So I'll give you an example of it, where I see it. Here's an example for you. If knowledge is valuable in an organization, and I was part of that organization, why would I share my knowledge with other people? If I share my knowledge with you and you know it too, all I've done is devalue me. I'll keep it to myself. So we get these fiefdoms of knowledge, and we get these people who drive their own areas, drive their own geography, drive their own clients, drive their own accounts, because one, that's how they're measured. I'm performing well. Look at my KPIs. I'm doing all right. So we need more unifying purpose and unifying metrics. So I'm doing well. And whilst I'm doing well, I can wipe my brow and maybe if I've got some time, play into the other guys to see if we can do it together. And you're absolutely right that it's this protectionism, looking after me, making sure I'm safe. You'll probably see it even more now than any other time, this year. I don't want to lose this account, don't want to lose this client, don't want to lose my job, don't want to lose the team, don't want to lose my status, reputation. And so in a way, there must be so many new ideas this year which are at the mercy of what people don't want to lose. So it's being motivated by what we're seeking to achieve and create. So many people are motivated by what they're seeking to avoid. They don't necessarily look up to see the opportunity. So I think that I totally understand the consideration of having to hunker down. Let's batten down the hatches. Let's look after stuff. I get that. But I just wonder whether if it's too much of a consideration, it becomes a motivation. And so therefore we miss out on the new perspectives which would create these new possibilities. And new ideas are so fragile. Someone suggests a new idea, and someone raises an eyebrow. The idea is dead. Someone suggests a new idea, someone smirks. The idea is dead. Let alone when the new idea is the victim of a discussion based upon how much is it going to cost us if it doesn't work?
I think the fragility of a new idea is a very good metaphor or a very good, it is delicate.
Yes.
I think that's very true.
And then it gets suggested into an environment where people say, yeah, it's a nice idea, but if it doesn't work, how much is this going to cost? Margin, market share, revenue, income. What are we going to lose with this one? And I like it, but what are we going to lose? Let's consider this wisely. The new idea is dead because people are starting to talk about it in a negative way and explore all the reasons why it won't work. And you'll always find reasons why things don't work.
So in the limited time that I have with you, because with a beverage and a Chinese takeaway, I could keep on at this into the wee hours, and
maybe some West African cuisine.
You're not going to let it go, are you? so there is that. So for me, I've got two kind of things I want to ask you. One is in the time we've got, which is, was there a moment in your life where you had a book, a conversation with somebody, and an observation where you really thought that was one of the real shifts, not in me wanting to do that career, but in my learning, in my understanding of my topic?
I think, do you know what? I've had a few. And, I think because I'm always after an epiphany. I'm always trying to find one.
I need a paradigm shift by a Wednesday, or I'm not a happy man.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. So probably had a few, really. I think it's funny because someone once said to me that pride can be a very expensive thing. It's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had. I see it in business all the time, where people's ego drives them to champion something which is failing. When they have good luck and they confuse it for genius. So many times that, we drive an agenda, because, we'll lose face not to, we want to have our say. I was probably told that as a teenager, pride can be a very expensive thing. I think it's very true. And the other piece of advice that, I had is that someone once said to me that life is about timing. And when you're young, I don't think you realise that. And the older you get, men of a certain age like us, that will...
I look good for 74.
We'll start to realise that it is about timing. I genuinely believe it. And I think that, look at the time that we're in now. I think we'll look back in 5 years or 10 years' time, and there'll be some super successful companies in the next 5 years or 10 years. And I bet you they were born out of this. I bet you.
Yeah.
So it almost proves that circumstance and situation are not important. What's most important is what we choose to do with it. And I think that, I realised too late the power of choice. And I think that, we can make great choices rather than you look at the circumstance and situation that we're in. I always say that blame looks backwards, responsibility looks forwards. And as soon as you start to take responsibility and allow that to meet great timing, I think that we can really do some amazing stuff.
So before I kind of get into my closing funnel, which is now getting relatively well practiced, this is a question that might test you a little bit, but what's the best, maybe not the best, what's the bit of advice that you're almost most proud of giving somebody?
Specifically for an individual, or do you mean the advice I give out often?
No, I think, I think for an individual where you've actually thought, you know what, I actually think that's going to help.
You know what? Here's the thing for you, and I need to be careful how I word this one, but it's amazing because I'm really, really lucky. I'm very lucky. I've traveled the world working with some amazing people, incredibly successful business people and sports people. And the best psychology I've ever done hasn't come from a psychology book. When you're sat in front of a 16, 17-year-old golfer, who earns, a few million quid a year, lives at home with his mum and dad in a 2-bedroom house, and he's had a bad day and he wants to kill himself and kill you. And you just say to him, look, stop being an arse, go and practice tomorrow. It's quite possibly the best advice I've ever handed out. Is the advice which is more fatherly and not sort of or as a best mate. It's the sort of thing you say to your best mate, which is look, you've been a twat. Go on practice tomorrow.
Well, there's something genuinely human in it.
Yeah. And I swear to God, it's the best. That there was a I'm not going to name the golfer, but there's a golfer who was languishing at wherever sort of 70th in the world, young kid. and he won his first tournament in a number of years. And I promise you, the advice I gave him was just stop moaning and go out and win. There was no technical advice. There's no great psychology behind it. He needed a kick up the arse. And he just needed a kick up the arse. He needed a clip round the ear. And so the best advice I've ever given has literally been that moment of truth. And you'll be amazed actually how, sometimes, with very senior people or very wealthy people, whatever it might be, sometimes, the ability to look them in the eye, and risk everything is worth it. And, you just
I
have
buy into that fully.
Honest conversation, not from a psychologist to a client, not from, a consultant to a CEO, but from one human being to another that says, look, mate, it's more like this than like that.
I buy into that. And when I try and find people to bring onto my team, my issue isn't their academic intelligence or what the books they've read, because generally they're smarter than I am and they've read a lot more and they're better qualified. My biggest issue is their ability to stand in front of somebody senior or sit and whatever and just occasionally go, that's bollocks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And for it to be acceptable because it's coming from the heart, from somebody that is genuinely sharing and not judging.
That's right. And I think, you do have to build a relationship to have that level of honesty.
Yeah.
So, but, that in itself, it enables you to have greater optionality. So when you build the relationship up high, then it gives you the license, to have a new level of honesty. Yeah. And I think that there's no substitute for it. You can't read that in books. You learn it by doing it.
I think actually in terms of one of the greatest skills, I think when I'm looking at leaders is that ability to build the trust, to have the honest conversation, which leads to the moments of humanity where then we're trusted. So I definitely buy into that.
Yeah, we need to become increasingly human-led and technology-enabled. We need to increasingly think about, the way in which we can humanize language, to humanize what people do. I think that it's an interesting skill for leaders moving forwards.
So listen, Jamil, I want to stay here for the next 4 or 5 hours, but I'm relatively sure that you have to go and actually do something.
You'll be roasting in that body warmer if you sat there for the next 4 or 5 hours.
Listen, I thank you for bringing that up, but I realised that this top I had on was reacting to the lens, and it was sending me a bit squiffy, actually. So I had to quickly put that on. Thanks for that. Yeah,
I'll be feeling sick. I'll be feeling sick by the end of the hour, actually. So no, I'm glad you got the.
No, exactly. I thought it's a bit woo, so I've shoved it on. So if people want to, I'm going to put your contact details in the description. But if people want to reach out and engage with you, is it via LinkedIn, your website? What's the best way to see?
Yeah, I've got my details are on a toilet wall in Woking. But
you were doing well up until the last minute, weren't you? And then you blew it.
but yeah, Jamil_Qureshi, all through LinkedIn, is fine by me. And obviously my website is jamilqureshi.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from people.
Okay, fantastic. Listen, on that note, I'm going to press the stop button. I'm just going to ask you to not go away for a moment, just in case there's a crisis. But just from me personally, just thank you so much for coming on this episode.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.